Assalamu alaikum dear students, welcome to the 31st lecture of public finance. We have basically covered all the contents up till 30th lecture. We have had very interesting discussions and debates, but I won't call them debates as such because I was the only one talking over here. I congratulate you after bearing me for 30 lectures, and I know that is difficult because I can be because my main aim has been to repeat and associate to things, and I kept repeating on things. The aim was that the things are imprinted in your mind, as I have mentioned again. So from now onwards, the lecture 31 would be consisting of the summary of what we have covered in 15 lectures. I would try my level best to cover as much as topics that we have discussed, at least touch them. I've picked the most important, not in a sense from exam point of view, because most important from the conceptual standing, that why we had discussion on public finance and what were the most important implications, because that were the most part covered in at least first few lectures. So I would be discussing that in first, summarizing actually the first 15 lectures of that we had in public finance. Moving on, this lecture 31 is based on the revision of the course and of the first 15 in fact. So we started with, since I have so much area to cover, so I would be very fast in this, I hope, because since we have already covered these topics, so I don't think there is need for repetition right now. This is already a repetition that is taking place, and that is good for you. Now, what is public finance? Public finance is basically a field of economics concerned with how governments raise money, how that money is spent, and the effects of activities of the government in the economy and the society as a whole. It is also known as public economics or public sector economics. What governments are good for? Government set common rules of behavior. They protect the citizens from external threats. They pool resources for a common good. Intervene in the system, since individuals may be unable to evaluate utility of certain products. In that case, they would be maybe making elementary education mandatory for all the children. So people sometimes do not evaluate the utility of certain goods that are important for them. So there would be a need for intervention. The same would be the case for public defense, which is mentioned as protect the citizen from external threats. But some citizens might not be aware of the importance of public defense. Then governments address and correct market failures. Market failure in a sense to provide institutions that allow market to function. For example, to protect property rights. So certain institutions established by the government protect property rights of the business entities and the individuals. To avoid the essential goods and services, to provide the essential goods and services that markets fail to provide. Because if you let it to the market, then maybe public goods like provision of street lights and public goods like provision of defense and certain goods would not be provided by the private sector, because the private sector would only be taking up those goods, in which case they would be getting higher positive returns because they are profit maximizers. But in that case, the government involvement is necessary so that they can provide those goods to the citizens, because profit maximizers won't be providing those goods, and consumers might not be willing to pay for those goods. For example, not every consumer would be willing to pay for example, you can say reduction of environment pollution. So that is the mandate of the government. Then regulating the behavior of business entities, which are for example, by constituting monopoly control authorities, government need to correct, in other words, certain market failures by their intervention, and so that in fact for the welfare of its citizens. Then basically the activities of government is comprised of thousands of government units, but there are 3 tiers. We have discussed them later on in the last lectures also. Federal, provincial and local governments. Each level allocates different levels, different types, is allocated with different types of resources and has different types of functions. Now why public finance is needed? Because it is needed for taxation, protection to the infant industry. We had excessive discussion on that, providing employment opportunities priorities in times of recessions: economic planning to ensuring equity or equality, economic stability, one of the mandates of fiscal policy, optimum utilization of resources, savings to ensure savings and investments, to provide subsidies and grants. We discussed that under government grants to the poor also, and provision of public goods. We had extensive discussion later on this as well. Then what are the major fiscal functions? Allocation function of the government, there is distribution function of the government, there is stabilization function of the government. Now allocation function, allocation of total resources between private goods and public goods, that the choice of optimal mix. Then choosing the mix of social goods, what type of social goods are required to be provided. Taxation and spending are the major instruments of the government for allocation to ensure the allocation function. And there is importance of also non-fiscal regulatory instruments. It is not just the expenditure and spending of the government, but also the regulations that they enact in the economy to ensure proper allocation of resources. For example, government might also say that certain types of goods are produced by only certain types of industries, or no more investment in that sort of area. These sorts of regulations, maybe those regulations are through direct government laws. They might enact a certain law, or they also might use, for example, some control over, for example, commercial banks, that this sector is not to be allocated with any credit anymore. So then there is distribution function, distribution of income and wealth between various classes of citizens. Taxes and subsidies are the major tools for this distribution of wealth, because you tax the higher income class and then you provide subsidies to the lower income class. Under allocation function, taxes are used to distribute resources between private and public wants. Stabilization function, influencing the unemployment, price level and output. We discussed that in terms of under fiscal deficits also and public debts also, because stabilization is one of the mandates of the government. They might reduce the tax rates to increase the consumption by various by economic agents, to result into more investments and more consumption, so economy can be boosted up and unemployment rates can be reduced, and that would be to tone down the effects of various economic cycle peaks and recessions. Then we discussed what would be the efficiency criteria of the government. We discussed that under positive and normative economic principles. What are positive? Positive economics actually consider the facts and figures, and it is based on the data that originates from any policy, and that is without any judgments or appropriateness, without any social norms involvement of social norms. While on the other hand, normative economics is designed to formulate recommendations on what should be, that considers moral values, ethic values, and the social norms prevailing in the society. So there are different ways to evaluate a public policy in terms of positive economics and normative economics. Then most of the evaluation, normative evaluation of resource use, is based on the criteria of efficiency, which is Pareto optimality. Pareto optimality is the efficiency criteria which is satisfied when resources are used over any given period of time in such a way as to make it impossible to make one individual better off without making the other individual or other entity worse off. So because if we improve the well-being of one individual, if we do not have to reduce the well-being of other individual, then that would not be Pareto optimality. Pareto optimality would be the case when, to improve the well-being of one individual, we would have to make the other individual worst off. Based on this grounds, actually, we also had a greater discussion on, for example, welfare economic perspective, and we discussed Pareto optimality, and we discussed various efficiency criterias. We discussed various efficiency criteria for the government. Now, what are effects? How can government consider the efficiency in the economy? We discussed the concept of total social benefit and total social cost. Total social benefit, actually, I hope we have this in the revision also. We also consider the net benefits. Total social benefit is the benefit accruing in terms of the benefit directly to the between two party holders, and then the external benefits also. We need to consider the external benefits also to make it a whole as a total social benefit, and we need to consider the external costs also to make the total social cost. So total social cost will be the cost incurred and then plus the external cost also, and total benefit, so social benefit would be the benefit plus the external benefit also, and that would be the net benefit would be total social benefit and minus total social cost. So in terms of graphical analysis, the net social benefit occurs where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, and that would be where the graph of the total social benefit and total social cost is at the maximum difference from each other. Now, conditions under which market is Pareto optimal: all productive resources are privately owned, all transactions take place in markets, and each separate market, many competing sellers offer a standardized product and many competing buyers. Economic power is dispersed in a sense, and all relevant information is freely available, and resources are mobile and can be freely employed. So under these conditions, if price would represent the marginal private benefit or marginal social benefit, and price is also equal to marginal private cost and marginal social cost, and at that point, when price is determined where marginal private benefit is equal to marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, then that would be the efficiency condition. Now, when does a market interaction fail to achieve efficiency? We have discussed numerous examples of marginal social benefit being equal to marginal social cost. We discussed them in terms of numerous projects by the government. We discussed them in a sense that if marginal social benefit is not equal to marginal social cost, and if, for example, we fail to consider any external benefit or external cost while equating marginal social benefit to marginal social cost, then there would not be any efficiency in the market. Then how that efficiency is distorted, other than ignoring those things, then that would be monopolies, taxes, and subsidies. Monopolies actually result into monopolies result into monopoly powers, where they charge the price higher than the marginal cost of production, and that would be resulting into an inefficiency. Then there are taxes. Taxes actually result into change in cost, and subsidies result into the change in price in terms of how an individual purchase that project, and that would result into inefficiency in the market. So government intervention is required in terms of a market failure. For example, may be warranted if there is a monopoly power. There are effects of market transactions on the third parties, which are called externalities, which we will discuss again, which I would mention again. Externalities are actually the costs accruing to the parties who are not involved in the transaction, third parties basically. So if there is a cost incurred by them, and if there is a benefit incurred by them, benefit is termed as is positive externality, and cost is termed as negative externality, and those externalities are actually the external cost and external benefits that are required to be included in the private benefit and private cost, so that we can have the total social benefit and total social cost, which I discussed earlier. So government intervention is required whenever there is a monopoly power, whenever the effects of market transactions on third parties are there. So there are external benefits that are required to be internalized. We will discuss that again. Lack of a market for a good where marginal social benefit is greater than marginal social cost, and those are basically the public goods. And incomplete information about goods being sold. Again, the involvement of the government is necessary. We discussed that, for example, individuals might not be able to, in terms of education, might not be able to actually judge the utility that they derive from the use of that product. So there is a need of involvement of the government. And then when there are unstable markets. Now taking this on, we would discuss externalities and public policies. What are externalities? Externalities are cost or benefits of market transactions not reflected in the prices. These are actually the cost and benefits which are accrued by the third parties. And for example, negative externality is cost to the third party, and positive externality is a benefit to the third party. For example, if there is an industry producing a good, then in that case it might also be causing pollution into the overall area in which it is producing, and in that case that pollution is a cost going towards the third party, which is actually not even consuming that product. So that would be a negative externality. And there were positive externalities. We consider the example of vaccinations, in which if I am vaccinated, then in that case if I am vaccinated, then it also benefits you in a sense that at least you have a lesser risk of being catching that disease from me. So that is a positive externality originating from myself being vaccinated. So these externalities result into distortion of market efficiency, because if that price, that benefit and that cost is not added in the total benefit or total cost, then there is an inefficiency, so we need to consider those. So the marginal external cost is the dollar value of the cost to third parties from production or consumption of the additional unit of a good. This occurs when there is a negative externality, and the total social cost is basically the total private cost plus the total external cost, which is a negative externality. So in terms of marginal analysis, it would be marginal social cost would be equal to marginal private cost plus marginal social cost. So there was an example of an externality that we discussed, that if there is an industry that is producing certain amounts of paper, and if the cost of, for example, maybe there is external cost, it is causing pollution in the environment, it is cutting too much trees, and that also results into pollution. So that external cost needs to be incorporated into price of that product. Only that would result into an efficiency. So in this graph we discussed that there is a supply curve which is represented only in terms of marginal private cost, like cost of producing that good. So if we need to consider the cost of external cost, that cost of pollution or cost of cutting down too many trees and cost to the society, we need to incorporate that cost into the private cost, marginal private cost, which would be the new supply curve represented by marginal social cost. And then in that case, the demand curve intersection would represent a higher price. Now this would be an efficient outcome, a higher price from $100 to $105, and reduced quantity from 5 million tons of paper per year to 4.5 million tons of paper per year. This was just an example to represent that if external costs are not incorporated into the analysis, that would result into lower prices. So prices should reflect the private cost as well as the external cost, and then it would be an efficient outcome in the market. So efficiency is very important, and government can do some stuff to internalize that externality. Internalizing externality would mean to bring it into the price, to incorporate that externality into the price. Then there are positive externalities. The marginal external benefit is the dollar value of the benefit to third parties from an additional unit of production of consumption of a good. This occurs when there is a positive externality. And to discuss this, let me mention that there is a total social benefit. Total social benefit is the sum of total private benefit and total external benefit accruing to the third party. Then if the price of the product actually reflects the total social benefit derived from because the benefit derived by other individuals should also be incorporated into that supply and demand relationship of the product. So marginal social benefit is equal to marginal private benefit plus marginal external benefit, and this is represented over here in this slide. We considered actually the price of a vaccination, because we considered that if an individual is vaccinated, there is not just the benefit to that individual, which is a private benefit, there would be benefit to the society as a whole, because the people around him have lesser risk of catching that disease from him. So in that case, the price or the demand curve should represent, for example, that benefit. So marginal private benefit, when we add up marginal private benefit and marginal external benefit, which is a positive externality, then the new marginal social benefit would be the curve which is showing an equilibrium point at point V, and the price would increase. So now the price reflects the price of includes the positive externality in itself, and the quantity has increased, of course. And there is, for example, increase in price. So this would be an efficient market outcome considering a positive externality. Now, how a government can internalize an externality, we would go on to discuss that taxes can be used to reduce, for example, negative externality, to bring to increase the cost of production, and for example, subsidies can be used to consider the positive externalities, but we would discuss that later. An externality, or maybe we have already discussed that, so there is no requirement of going to that much detail right now. As I said, that I would be trying to highlight many topics that we have gone through in the first 15 lectures, and those were, you must consider that those were, like, each one of those lectures were composed of 1 hour session, so it is very difficult to compress all the 15 hours or 15 lectures in this 1 hour that we have right now. An externality can be internalized if there is a policy that can cause market participants to account for the cost and benefits accruing to the third parties, the cost and benefits of their actions. Now this requires, the main point is to identify the market participants, and the second thing is to assign the monetary value to that external benefit and external cost. So that is the most difficult thing to do, by the way. So corrective tax to remove the negative externality, setting a tax equal to margin external cost will internalize a negative externality. The main thing over here is, first we need to assign a monetary value to the external cost, and then we define a tax which is exactly equal to that marginal external cost, and that would internalize automatically the externality. We saw in that graph that in that case the supply curve would shift upwards, because if we can define that exact amount by which there is an external cost of that, for example paper producing industry, and we can tax that, then that would be reflecting into increase in price and reduce in quantity, and that would exactly internalize the negative externality originating from it. Then on the same thing, a correcting subsidy, for example, setting a subsidy equal to marginal external benefit will internalize a positive externality. For example, we again discussed that in a sense that we had an example of a graphical analysis of a positive externality in terms of vaccinations. Then if that amount is subsidized, then automatically the demand curve would shift from, for example, $5 per vaccination, because if the amount increases, if the price increases from 25 to 30, that amount is to be subsidized by the government, and that would result into an efficient outcome in the market. Then we moved on after discussing externalities and effects of various actions in the government and how government can internalize various externalities. We discussed them in detail in terms of pollution, in terms of various scenarios. Then we move on to the public goods. Public goods are goods for which exclusion is impossible, basically. For example, national defense. If one individual is getting a national defense, then in any case all the individuals would be getting national defense. So all the individuals will be benefiting from that public good. So exclusion is impossible in case of a public good. Then basically non-exclusion, the inability of a seller to prevent people from consuming that good. That is the non-exclusion characteristic of the public good. For example, if government starts national defense, then everybody would be getting that national defense. If they start a program which reduces pollution, then people who are not even paying for it would be benefiting from that cleaner environment or cleaner river or more greener, for example, pastures, more trees, for example. Then there is non-rivalry. That is the characteristic that if one person consumes that public good, then another person's pleasure is not diminished by use of that good. So that would mean that if I consume that public good, then I cannot restrict you from using or consuming that public good also. There is no rivalry among the consumption. The quantity and the satisfaction does not diminish from that. Then there are the concept of pure public good and pure private good. Pure public good, there is no ability to exclude, and there is no rivalry in pure public good. Then we discussed what are pure private goods. There is a clear ability to exclude, and there is rivalry of benefits also from the pure private goods also. Then we moved this discussion on to, for example, we had a chart in which we discussed various types of public goods and pure public good and pure private goods, and then in between we had excludable public goods and congestible public goods. So within the bracket of pure public and pure private goods, we had a greater discussion on that. Then there is marginal cost of provision of public goods. The marginal cost of allowing another person to benefit from another unit being produced, consumed by that person, will be zero, in fact, for a greater level of public good. This can be seen in this graph. For example, marginal cost of allowing an additional person to consume a given quantity of a public good is zero over here, and that's why the line is on the x-axis. And marginal cost of consuming and producing a public good is of a pure public good is constant, and it is equal to average cost, because if you produce more units, the same cost would be incurred. Now in order to discuss clarify the concept of pure public good and pure private good, we discussed a very interesting interesting example of bread and heat, for example, in which case bread was clearly a pure private good, because exclusion was possible, and there is rivalry because there is a certain quantity of bread available, and we assumed an example of a room in which like a certain amount of individuals, 5 or 6 individuals are within that room, and we assumed that if bread is supplied 3 times a day, then there would be a rivalry and there would be exclusion would be possible, because a certain quantity of bread is there, and if I consume more, then that would leave less for your consumption. And then we discussed heat, that if there is a heating system in that room also, then everybody would benefit with the same level of heat, and there is no rivalry and there is no exclusion in that sense. Then between, like as I said, that we had a big chart in which we discussed characteristics of a pure public good, and at the other extreme we discussed the characteristics of pure private good, and within these two we discussed the price excludable public goods, and we discussed congestible public goods. Now price excludable public goods are those public goods which in which case there is no rivalry but exclusion is possible, because in this case, if price mechanism, for example TV channels or cable TV can be used for those individuals to be excluded who do not pay for the good. So this is like a category little less than the pure public good, but it is also a public good. Then we discussed the congestible public goods, where after a point the enjoyment received by consumer is diminished by crowding or congestion, and we discussed that these congestible, for example roads and parks, if a road is travelled by one more individual, that would result into more traffic congestion, and that congestion would result into reduced utility derived by other individuals. So that is a congestible public good. So that is another type. So it has rivalry but it has no excludability. This was a graphical analysis of a congestible public good. The marginal cost, for example, of allowing given number of users that product of that quantity of public good was 0. But then when for example number of consumers per hour in terms of a road, for example, if a number of cars increase, then the marginal cost would increase later on because of congestion too, and that would marginal cost would be borne by other consumers. So it is a congestible public good. Then we discussed that how the difference between the demand of private good and public good. Demand for pure private good is derived by adding quantities at each price, while demand for public good is derived by how much people will be willing to pay for each quantity. That is one of the major differences. For example, there was a graphical analysis through which we saw that in terms of a private good, the total demand is sum of horizontal summation of individual demand curves, and that is demand of A, B and demand of C, and those are added up to make the market demand curve. For example, the demand for loaves of bread would be at equilibrium point E if we consider the quantity demanded at that given price by all the individuals, and that would be the total market demand. While demand for a pure public good is different, because in this case we consider the marginal benefit derived by each individuals, because on x-axis this is marginal benefit, the benefit derived by each individual, and the total demand curve, the total demand for that public good would be the sum of their marginal benefits of each individual, not the sum of the quantities that are being used, sum of the marginal benefits. So that is summation on the y parameters of y-axis. So Z1 represents how each individual, the marginal benefit derived by each individual for one security guard over here. So there are 3 individuals A, B and C, and there are 3 demand curves for this public good, which is the number of security guards per week. And in this case, the total demand curve for that public good would be the sum of marginal benefit derived by each individual for one security guard represents by point Z1, and simultaneously point Z2, Z3 and Z4 represent for 2, 3 and 4 security guards respectively. So that would be basically the way which demand for a pure public good is calculated. Now efficient, what would be, if that is the demand for public good, what would be the efficient output of a public public good. The socially optimal level of a public good being provided requires that we produce the good where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, and marginal social cost includes basically marginal private cost as well as the external cost, and marginal benefit includes marginal social benefit includes private benefits and as well as the externalities and sum of marginal private benefits actually of all the individuals. And the main thing is that we discussed over here is the concept of voluntarily expressing what is the benefit each individual is deriving from that good, and we came up to the process of Lind-Hall pricing, where everyone in the group cooperates and pays their marginal benefit, and in this way the efficient output of for example pure public good can be decided. So we saw over here is that in case of Lind-Hall pricing, if each individual would voluntarily and honestly express the marginal benefit that they derive from 3 security guards, then they would sum up to be representing the demand curve, which is a marginal social benefit curve, and at the point where that marginal social benefit curve is equal to marginal social cost curve, assuming a constant social cost, assuming that each security guard adds up to the same level of the cost, for example 450 per security guard. So for 3 security guards it would be 450 plus 450 plus 450, of course, not 450 multiplied by 3. So equilibrium point would come up only if each and every individual would voluntarily express that this is the marginal benefit that they derive from that product. Then with this concept we brought along the concept of free riding, because since marginal benefit that is derived is very intrinsic sort of a concept, and it is the value, the monetary value that an individual would derive from the use of a public good, then there would be chances of strategic behavior by the individual, considering that they might understate their marginal benefit, considering that they would know that others would also would be paying equal to their marginal benefit. So if I reduce my marginal benefit, I would still get the product without having to pay for it, and that would result into the concept of free riding. Now free riding is because of smaller communities and in the presence of Lind-Hall pricing, that is possible that free riding would be pointed out, and it would be very difficult. An individual would honestly express their marginal benefits. But when the communities grow larger, and if you are talking at the country level, then if everyone knows who contributes, there can be powerful social stigmas applied to shrinkers, of course, if it is a small community. But if there are large number of people, it is easier to determine the shrinkers in a small group, and the punishment is more profound when people close to you point you out. But if there are a large number of people, this whole thing becomes difficult. If you turn to bigger communities, Lind-Hall pricing as well as Lind-Hall pricing would become difficult, and free riding would become easier. Then we moved on to, since we were discussing the supply of public goods, then we moved on to the process of political process and the public choice. Now the supply of public goods through institutions is when decisions are made through political interaction of many persons according to pre-established rules. Rules are basically rules of, for example, majority rule, minority rule, which we discussed in detail, and I would highlight them again in this lecture as well. So there is a debate between public choice and private choice, because in case of private choice there would be Lind-Hall pricing and there would be voluntary cost sharing, but in case of public choice there would be taxes by the government in which the use of that product would be taxed in terms of supply of that public good. So in that case, if there is a political outcome that is to be reached, then how that outcome is reached, and that is reached through the political equilibrium. It is an agreement on the level of production of one or more of the public good given the specified rule of making that collective choice. We will discuss rules later on, and we have discussed them in detail, how the outcome is reached, and the distribution of tax shares among the individuals. So there is an agreement about how the rule is defined, what rule is to be followed, and given that rule and given the tax share of each individual, tax share would represent the price that each individual would be bearing for that particular good, because if it is a matter of public choice, then government cannot depend on the voluntary payment of individuals. there are always individuals who are, for example, listening to you can say radios or certain type of radio broadcast which is dependent on, for example, voluntary contribution by its listeners, but many individuals will listen to it without having to pay for it. So there is free riding. So government cannot depend on that. Government need to incorporate taxes to generate revenue, taxes to finance the production of those goods and services, as well as the taxes to correct the market system, which we discussed in detail. So the point is that the political equilibrium is an agreement on the level of production of one or more public good, given collective agreement, basically given the rule of making that collective choice, as well as the tax share of each individual. Then tax shares are sometimes called tax prices, or pre-announced levies assigned to citizens. They are portion of a unit cost of a good proposed to be provided by the government. The government would divide the total cost, and that would be the tax share of each individual. An increase in cost would result into increase in tax share, and that would result into reduction of that or elimination of that public choice, and people would vote against it if the tax share is increased. So an individual would only benefit where his tax share, which is the cost that he is bearing, which is marginal private cost, would be equal to marginal benefit from the use of that product. So an individual would not be better off as soon as the quantity increases from Q star, where his tax rate or tax share would be greater than the marginal benefit he is deriving from the product. So the most preferred outcome of a voter would be where his marginal private benefit would be equal to the marginal private cost. Marginal private benefit would be the benefit he is deriving from the use of that product, and marginal private cost would be the tax share that he is bearing. Then there was a debate, of course, if we talk about the political equilibrium and political public choice, then there is of course the voting mechanism and how individuals would vote and why they vote. So the voting would depend on the benefits, cost, and the probability that voting achieve the anticipated benefits. So of course cost, in the sense that there is time allocated for that poll. Now, we are not discussing right now just only the polls as a whole, but for any public choice mechanism. We are considering over here for now that individuals vote for each and every public choice, but generally what happens is that we choose the political representatives, and they represent our choices in a whole collective choice mechanism. So indirectly, if I vote for a candidate who has for example certain preferred outcomes, then he is representing me in, for example, the overall scenario, for example in the parliament or in the National Assembly, where that output is being decided by the public through political process. So when I voted for him, I gave him an option to vote on my behalf. So but now we are just discussing a general vote concept, that if political outcomes or political equilibrium is reached through a decision to vote, then that decision to vote depends on the benefits that I would derive from the voting and the cost that would accrue to me because of that voting process. And considering the probability that if I vote, then the benefit of my choice would come to be the political equilibrium. Cost in a sense of time to visit the polling station, as well as the cost of information collection. Then when an individual decides not to vote, is that if he thinks that I won't not be able to influence the political outcome, then if for example alternatives that are presented to me are very close by, whether the quantity A and quantity B of a public good do not affect me much, so in that case I'm indifferent. And then preferred position is too far, for example what I prefer is too far away from the available alternatives, then even then I would not vote. And if I do have for example poor information, so there is a concept of rational ignorance associated to it, is the idea that too many voters, the marginal cost of obtaining information concerning an issue is greater than the marginal benefit of gaining that information. This leads the voter for not to gather the information and not to vote at all. What are the determinants of the political outcome, political equilibrium? The public choice rule, majority, minority, anonymity, we discussed that and we would highlight that again. Average and marginal cost of the public good, of course the cost accruing of that public good, information available, the cost and on the cost and benefit, the distribution of the tax share, the price that each individual would have to pay, and distribution of benefits among the voters. We also discussed that the benefits are accruing to which entity, which group of individuals. That is also very important. important in terms of, these are basically the determinants of the political equilibrium, that how when the political equilibrium is reached, it is dependent on these various things. So then we discussed the political equilibrium under the majority rule. Under majority rule, when there are majority rule is like, for example, the simple majority rule is 50%, 51% of individual voting for an outcome is the preferred outcome, is the equilibrium outcome. So in this case, we added up the marginal benefits of all the individuals in the same way which I discussed, and the marginal cost of providing the security guard is 350 for every security guard, and when the individual would vote, he would consider his marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost, and as long as his marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost, he would continue greater or equal to marginal cost, he would vote, and after that he would not vote. So the majority rule would represent, to come to the 4 security guards in this case, considering each individual's marginal benefit and their tax shares. Each individual is voting considering the tax share, which is the marginal cost that he would be bearing. Then we over here, in terms of majority, simple majority rule and general, for example, other majority rules, we discussed the importance of a median voter. Median voter model assumes that the voter whose most preferred outcome is the median of the most preferred political outcomes of all the voters available, then his outcome would be the actually the equilibrium. So basically, most of what are the implications of median voter model? Only the median voter gets his most preferred outcome, not 51% of the voters. Others get too little or too much. So median voter is getting the benefit, as we saw in the graph. Some would be getting, for example, too little, and some would be getting too much of the public good. The greater the dispersion, the greater the dissatisfaction, of course. The greater they are far away, their preferred outcomes are far away from each other, the greater would be the level of dissatisfaction. The more voter preferences are clustered, the greater the level of satisfaction. And you know, the most important thing is that the political parties would usually target the median voter preferences, because they would consider that that would be the equilibrium outcome, because this is, so political parties mostly target the median voters in terms of the preferred outcomes of various policies. Now, we also discussed the political externalities, or the losses in well-being that occur when voters do not obtain their most preferred outcomes. As we discussed, that 51% of the voters do not get their most preferred outcome. Only the median voter does. Some of them get too much, and some of them get too little. So that would be a political externality. The political externality is equal to 0 if tax shares are adjusted to marginal benefits. Political externality does not exist in unanimous consent, when everybody has to agree and everybody has a veto power. More inclusive majorities and protect minorities, and higher the majority rule, for example 2/3 or 7/8, greater the amount of majority required to reach to a political equilibrium, lesser would be the political externality. But then we also discussed the political transaction cost. Political transaction costs are the measures of the value of time and effort that are required to reach to an agreement or a collective choice or political equilibrium. So citizens must weigh political externality and political cost, because on one hand, the political externality would increase if you take it to, for example, if one single individual is making all the decisions, the political externality would be 0, but the transaction cost would be 0, but political externality would be highest. And on the other hand, if it is unanimous consent, the political externality would be 0, because everybody would be on board for that decision, but the cost of taking that decision would be too much, in terms of considering that the cost of resources, time and effort that is employed in reaching that agreement. We also discussed the uniqueness and cycling concept while discussing the political process. A unique political equilibrium may not emerge under majority rule. Two or more public goods output may receive majority votes. So this is the case when there are individuals who have multi-peaked preferences. We would discuss that. The outcome can depend on factors other than cost and benefits, the order in which alternatives are presented, inclusion or exclusion of certain alternatives, and distributing possibilities. So we need to discuss the concept of single peak preferences and multiple peak preferences. Single peak preferences are a unique optimal outcome, where a unique optimal outcome exists, and multi-peak preferences are when a person moves away from his most preferred outcome, they become worse off, but when they reach to the other extreme, they are better off again. So that is a multi-peak preferences, which is preference which is represented in this graph also. So an individual, for example B, individual A and individual C has single peak preferences, while individual B has a multi-peak preference. If he has a multiple peak preference, then that would result when he cast his votes for various political outcomes or for reaching the political equilibrium. The process of cycling would start, because there would be no political outcome in his presence. That resulted into the case where, for example, preference 1 was better than preference 2, preference 2 was, for example, better than preference 3, and preference 3 was better than preference 1. So there was a confusion all along, and the implication was that we got arbitrary results. We discussed that in terms of slides. This is a very important topic. You must consider that multiple peak preferences do exist in real life also. We would discuss that. So results are order dependent. Any can emerge as a winner, and this is the phenomenon of cycling. It is disturbing because it seems that there is no rhythm or rhyme to the political process. Only the public choices that are taken are influenced by how preferences are alternative, and whether in that political outcome, if there are 3 preferences, if you take out the second one, the whole outcome would change. So that is actually very shocking. But multiple peak preferences are actually inconsistent with the declining marginal benefit curve, which we discussed in terms of this slide, which result into an individual's net benefit increasing and then decreasing. But multiple peak preferences do exist in real life, although they are inconsistent with marginal benefit curve. And for an example, we discussed an example of public versus private schooling budgets, and it was a very interesting example because, for example, an individual, I have enough income to educate my children in private school, and if I need to vote for how much budget is to allocated to the public school, then I would say that very less budget is allocated to public school. But in that case, when less budget is allocated to public school, suppose the government decides on certain median level of budget to the public school, then in that case they would tax. Now if they tax, my income would reduce. Now I cannot educate my children in private school. So on the other extreme, I would choose that, okay, maximum budget is allocated to public school. So now you see there are 2 extremes. When I find out that tax is going to increase, then I would say my maximum budget is allocated to public schools because my children are going to be educated over there. And when my income is greater and there are no taxes, I would consider that private school is better, and I would ask no budget allocated to public school because my income would be more preferred to me. So in that case, this is a multiple peak preference, and it does exist, and it did exist in the Vietnam War also for USA, because on one end there were views that there shouldn't be any war, and the other view was that because we go for a war, we go for all out war, and we for example, the war should be a victory. There was no median or a central outcome for certain individuals. Then we started discussing the political process. Political process was basically because now you see we very consistently move from the one topic to other topic, and we moved from the role of the government. Then we moved to discuss the externalities and negative externalities and positive externalities, and then we discussed the public goods. Then we discussed that how those public goods are actually used, how those public goods, the quantity of public goods is decided, what is the supply of those public goods. Then we moved on to the process of what would be the equilibrium output and what would be the equilibrium amount of public good being provided, and from that we moved to the political process, where we discussed various rules of public choice, that majority minority rule, and there was unanimous decision, there was 2/3 majority, there was 7/8 majority. Then we moved on to what is the political process as such, through which these public goods are decided. So now we are going into the political process. Political process is based on the constitution, the majority rule and the minority rule. The constitution is an accepted set of rules by which decisions are made. They evolve over time and they are generally accepted by most of the citizens, and they actually benefit from, for example, some decisions require rules, some doesn't. So, for example, there is viable constitution of social contracts inherent in themselves, and considering the while of uncertainty and future opportunities, and while of uncertainty about your skill set, it would be very useful to enter into a social contract, and the constitution actually incorporates those social contracts are inherited into the constitution. So then there was minority rule, which might not satisfy the majority of the population. Political externalities imposed by, there are huge political externalities by minority rules. Minority rule can be one extreme by decision by one single individual, which is a dictatorship, or decisions by a group of individuals, which is oligarchs. And then there is, for example, the decisions are not taken at, for example, that no involvement of population, that would be in the sense of colonial rule. Where no citizen is involved in that decision making process. Then we discussed the majority rules. The simple majority rule is 51%, for which we saw an example in which median voters outcome was the political equilibrium. Then there is a 2/3 majority rule. Now if that would mean that political externality is being reduced, but the cost of this taking decision is being increased, and then there are a number of dissatisfied voters declines to 33% in a 2/3 majority. Then there is a unanimous consent in which all the individuals are to take the decision. There were various choice rules that we discussed. Then there is cost and benefits of a collective action. There is decrease in political externalities because of collective action, because everybody is more satisfied. In 51% majority, many people would be dissatisfied. In 2/3 majority, lesser number of people would be dissatisfied. So there is a benefit for that. And then cost and individual base due to actions of others through political process, of course, that is the political externality. And then there is increase in political cost. So the cost and benefit of a political action needs to be weighed, that what sort of public choice rule is to be applied. Political externalities are zero in unanimous consent, where everybody has to agree. Political externality are not the only cost. There are transaction cost of reaching the decision, knowledge of ability to, because when individuals have the ability to put on veto power, they would result into strategic behavior for their own personal gains. Then there is rational choice, rule that minimizes political externality and transaction cost, of course. Generally, people with extreme preferences may choose majority rule, and people who have higher opportunity cost of their time would be satisfied with the minority rule. This is the list of possible alternative methods of reaching a public choice rules. There is unanimity, then there is relative unanimity, which is the one of the majority rules, 2/3 or 7th, 8th, that is closer to unanimity, so it has very less political externality, but the cost is high. Then there is plurality rule, more than 3 outcomes possible. Out of, for example, 3 outcomes, the one which receives the greatest amount of votes would be selected. Then there is point count voting, enables voter to register the intensity of their preferences. In this case, there were points allocated, for example 100 points, so I would vote for 78 points for one outcome, and for example rest of the points for other outcome, showing my preference towards that outcome. And then there were instant runoffs, the most interesting types of alternative used in state of Hawaii. In this case, for example, people would assign preferences to rank the individuals. For example, there are 3 alternatives. They would rank those alternatives 1, 1st, 2nd and 3rd. The option which is getting the least amount of first rankings would be eliminated. Then automatically voting would be, for example, retabulated to get rankings for example, if my first choice was eliminated, then which was the 3rd one, my first choice is eliminated, which was, maybe assume there are 3 choices, A, B and C. If my preferred choice first was C, and if that is eliminated, then my second choice, which was B, would be my retabulated to be my first one, and the one which is the winner is actually going through this whole process. Then we moving on from this, after discussing the political process, we discussed the various agents that play part in the political process. One of them was politicians, who seek the elective office for a variety of reasons, for example power, for example prestige, for example desire to serve others. And politicians having similar ideas grouped together to form political parties, and political parties are are basically vote maximizers, and then if parties can be scaled on the quantity of government activity per year, then there is a median position versus an extreme position. Now, if most preferred outcome of voters are normally distributed, then parties maximize their votes by having a central position. We discussed that political parties are vote maximizers, so they have two choices: either they go for the extremes or they go for the median position. So normally parties might go for the median position, in which is the preferred position of, for example, the individual at the median, who is the median voter. That is what the political parties would target their platforms to be. If we assume that the voters are, for example, normally distributed for a certain amount of goods and services, then the mean would automatically be the median also. In terms of normal distribution, mean is equal to median, and automatically parties would target that and people would vote for that. And then we discuss the political in terms of there is not just the political parties, there are not just voters, there are other entities also playing the whole part in, for example, the political process. With these are, for example, special interest groups, or groups that lobby on a particular issue and put pressure on politicians, bureaucrats and the voters. An example of special interest groups are labor unions and trade unions. Now these labor unions and for example trade unions are lobby together, and their aim is basically to protect for example the interest of members of that group. So these special interest groups also influence for example the political outcomes because through influencing the voters and through influencing politicians and bureaucrats, they also influence the political outcomes or political equilibrium. Now there are for example, an example of special interest groups is union and or steel companies lobbying for tariffs and import quotas to protect their jobs or their profits, and in that case there are efficiency losses per job saved almost always exceed the pay of the retained worker. That is an interesting outcome. Then there are bureaucrats also, another entity which plays a role in the whole public choice process and public supply of public good process. Bureaucrats are those actually are responsible for implementing the public choice made through the political institutions or public institutions. They are involved in the delivery and production of the public goods. There is then the point is that the efficiency of that whole production process is difficult to measure because output is not quantifiable of certain public goods, for example national defense and for example cleaner environment, and it is not easily sold in the market, and but efficiency is also very difficult. But then on the other hand, these bureaucrats are the only individuals who actually know the cost of those goods being provided, and then since they do not own the outputs that they produce, then there is you can say principal agent problem, agency issue over here. I hope you know about that. William Niskan mentioned that bureaucrats actually seek to maximize their power. Now their power is directly correlated to with the resources that they have at hand. Now these resources are correlated with the size of the budget they have, so automatically that would result into their intention to increase the size of the budget, because that would increase their power ultimately. So they can either increase the output or they can increase the inputs that are required to produce that output. That is basically the behavior, that might be the behavior of the bureaucrats, and that we discussed that in a graphical sense, that they might convince the government to produce up to the point where total social benefit is greater than total social cost, even considering that at that point marginal social benefit is less than marginal social cost, because marginal social benefit being equal to marginal social cost was the optimal criteria that we discussed, and we proved actually through various graphical analysis that that is the optimal point, because at that point the gap between the net benefit is maximum. So then we moved on to cost and benefit analysis of the government. We discussed there are for example one of the idea is to conduct a cost effectiveness analysis. In that case the government would like to achieve a given objective through the minimum cost scenario. We discussed the program budgeting, and program budgeting is a concept in which it is different from line budgeting. Program budgeting is as a concept in which the different similar agencies, government agencies which try to pursue a similar objective, you pool all of them together and then you evaluate that if you need to achieve a given objective, you achieve that objective at the minimum cost possibility. Now, it actually allows policymakers to see trade-off between programs of various agencies with similar objectives, which is not visible under the line budgeting. We had a graphical analysis of that also. Graphical analysis in a sense that we had an indifference curve in which the government could, or ISOCONT, in which the government could see the minimum budget option of producing that output. As an example, let me say that, for example, the aim of the government is to, the main objective is to increase for example, life expectancy or increase lives of the citizens. In that case, a project by the agency to, for example, install fire alarms or to, and the health for fire ministry, or for example, you can say agency for fire protection plans to install fire alarms in the houses, and the other option is to, for example, vaccinate individuals. Now, or for example, the third option is to, for example, reduce road accidents. Now, all of these programs have the similar objective. So what the government would do is allocate the budget in terms of within these different projects, because the aim of the project would be same, and that is improve the life by maybe like reduce the death rate by 500 or 1,000 deaths per month or per year. So the aim would be to see the least cost method of achieving that objective. Now it reduces the cost of achieving a goal. It encourages competition among various government departments, because in that would result into improved effectiveness for the budget, because the aim of the bureaucrats is to maximize their budgets. So various projects would be trying to get the budget, and everybody would be, since the government would be allocating budget in terms of least cost basis, so everybody would be rationalizing their projects. So it would improve efficiency, effectiveness, it would encourage innovation, of course, it would improve the productivity, their effort to work, and it would reduce the cost, as I said, and of course that reduction in cost would result into reduction in tax and burden on taxpayers. Then we discussed the very important one, which was the cost benefit analysis, which was a more practical technique relative to merits of alternative government projects. Projects were with marginal social benefit less than marginal social cost are rejected. The whole aim of this project is, it is a statement of pros and cons. It is calculation of marginal social benefits and social cost, and then comparing those benefits and cost, and the government can see various projects and the net benefit that they are getting from each project, and they would choose the one which has the maximum net benefits. The gap between total social benefit and total social cost is maximum. Benefits must include indirect effects, and cost must include opportunity cost. Now we see over here the word is benefits must include indirect effects. That would be a positive externality, that should also be included, and cost must include the opportunity cost. That would also be opportunity cost plus the external costs that are incurred. Opportunity cost would be type of an external cost. Then negative externality should also be included if we need to consider the total social cost. There are three steps involved in cost benefit analysis. Those are: enumerate all cost and benefits of a proposed project, make a list. We did this whole process, we went through this process considering few examples. So we need to make a list of all the proposed cost and benefits of the project. We need to assign the dollar value to all the benefit and cost. That is the second step. And third step would be to discount the future benefits. We had a great detail on these, discuss them one by one, all of these steps. And in the end, the government would choose the project where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, maximum. So at point A, if the government is currently at point A, marginal social benefit is greater than marginal social cost. So net marginal benefit, net social gain is greater. Then even if it is at quantity Q2, it would increase the quantity. And if it is currently at quantity E, then it would reject that project, because marginal social benefit would be less than the marginal social social cost. Over here, while evaluating, discussing that we need to enumerate and evaluate all the costs and benefits, put a dollar value on all the projects. Then we discuss the concept of how to value the human life, because it is very difficult. Because certain government projects, like projects for vaccinate, for example, the polio drive by government of Pakistan, it is actually saving human lives. So the thing is that how do we put a dollar value to these human lives? So one way would be to consider their future discounted present value of their future earnings, but that would result into a great social issue, which would be old would be having less future income, discounted future income, than young. So that would mean that value of an old individual's life is much less than the young individual's life, and similarly the value of rich person's life is much more than the poor person's life. The other option is treating it as a public good and using a survey questionnaire, asking people that what would be their willingness to pay for this project. We also consider an example, for example, as an example of a road traffic accident, a move by a government to start a project in which they want to, for example, you can say remodel entrance to a highway to reduce traffic accidents, and go and tell people that this is what we are doing and this is how it would save you in terms of saving your life and save you in terms of your expenditure on your car due to traffic accident. So how much would you be willing to pay for it? Then the average dollar response would be used as a crude index. But since it is a public good, then there would be automatically the problem of free riding inherent into this automatically. And then we discuss the government subsidies and income support program after this, because you see we moved very systematically throughout these lectures. We started with the importance of government role in the topic of public finance, government expenditure, government revenue, what the government needs to consider, that is positive and negative externalities and the effects of their actions in the government in the scenario. Then we saw that those government actions are actually the provision of public goods, and those public goods are financed by taxes. So we made the taxes as prices based on which I needed to cast my vote, and based on that we discussed that political equilibrium is decided and how that political equilibrium is decided. Then we moved on to the point where we started evaluating various government projects, that once the government is elected and it is there, what type of projects it should consider and how those projects are to be evaluated. Then later on we moved on to the concept of subsidies and income support programs for the poor, and we saw that we discussed in detail that poverty is a very big issue and it breeds crime and social unrest in the society, and can we leave the eradication of poverty objective to the charitable institutions, because the charitable institutions are based on charity and they are not sustainable, and in the times of recessions the contributions are reduced, and that would result into them not providing enough amount subsidies to poor individuals. And then we also discussed the debate of welfare trap over here, that an individual consistently getting a welfare would reduce his willingness to work, which was discussed in great detail. Now why we have government programs to aid poor is that considering certain market outcomes might result into few individuals earning less than what they should have been earning, or what the minimum required is minimum required in the sense of having a minimum standard of living. So that is considered unacceptable, and there should be a support for a safety net in that sense. And then there is again, considering that minimum requirement, there is disagreement on the minimum required, which is required for the survival. Now policies that would require equity in distribution. Now if we consider this distribution, this whole scenario that government needs to aid the poor, then we will be considering that there should be equity in government distribution, but that is again against the context of an individual's ability to earn. The capitalistic point of view, that reward should be according to the ability of an individual to work. Now then earning according to work but provide minimal support coupled with equal opportunities in the labor market, providing the minimum amount to the individuals with opportunities to work would be one of the ways to go. Because we are concerned with equity and efficiency and welfare trap basically. So it is very important, because once you start paying the individuals, then you take a chunk out of those individuals who are efficiently utilizing those resources, and that would reduce their disposable income, and that would reduce reduce their ability to spend, and that would actually reduce the main concept is that these actions by the government should not reduce the pie, the size of the whole pie, or for example should not create inefficiency in the economy as a whole. So basically when we start to provide subsidies to aid the poor, we alter the income distribution, and that alteration actually results into inefficiency in the economy, because taxing the individual who have the ability to provide productive gains to the economy would result into reducing that ability and giving it to the individuals who do not have ability to earn that much. Now, if net benefits from resource use is less, ultimately everyone would be worse off. So as I said, that size of the pie should not decrease. Losses in efficiency reduces the economy's potential to produce more jobs and more production. So increased efficiency, the argument against that would be increased efficiency increases job creation. Question is, how many people, poor people are poor just because they cannot work? That is the question that is raised against that. Now, that the main thing is that why government should aid the poor is that it creates the positive externality of social stability in the system. Many citizens support because benefits emerge, that when people are benefits are collectively enjoyed, then they might support. So then some people might also support for in terms of their compassion, that they should support. Then some people might also support that poverty actually breeds unrest in terms of, for example, crimes, in terms of hatred, and in terms of, for example, revolutions. So I guess that would be the end of 31st lecture. We summarized the first 15 lectures. It was brief, it was fast, it was quick, but we discussed all these topics in great detail. What I needed to do was just brush them through once to bring them back to your minds. And in the 32nd lecture, we would be taking from lecture 16 to 30, where we start with taxation of the government and these subsidy programs, and we ended with, for example, the details of Pakistan's economy. Hope to see you soon. Take care.